Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Sacramento. As the chair of the investment committee of the second largest pension fund in the United States, a former teacher, and most importantly, as the father of two young daughters, Melissa and Sarah, I'm continually reminded of not just the value of gender diversity, but of the challenges faced by those who have been traditionally overlooked. Today's forum, however, is not just about how many women or people of color or people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender are represented in investment companies by asset owners or boards. Today's agenda is about full diversity, diversity of inclusion, diversity of thought, experience, skills, and perspectives. I think some people in Washington could benefit from today's event when you think about what's transpiring in our country today. The thing is that we know that diversity in all its forms ultimately works to improve a company's bottom line. The data is out there, and as trustees, we should act to improve the performance of our fund. We have speakers today who will share their empirical research and real-life experiences. So you may ask yourself, why do we think we have to keep improving and keep proving that diversity works? Why in 2017 do we need to be speaking about diversity and the value that diversity brings? This forum today is a great place to talk about it. Share your views with each other. In addition to what you will hear from today's distinguished speakers and panelists, I'm sure all of you have your own experiences, either recruiting a diverse workforce or being recruited into the workforce itself. Just as a side, a few years ago, I was at a traditional finance conference, a lot of men in blue suits and gray suits, and there was one panel that was about women in leadership, and the woman that was putting it on said, "Harry, would you do me a favor and attend this forum? It will be important." And the first thing I noticed when I walked in to the room, the colors were better. The colors were much better. Fewer gray suits, fewer blue suits. But then as I sat there as a minority male in a predominantly female session, what I realized the big difference in that session was that these women were talking with each other, not talking at each other. They were having a true dialogue and conversation about a myriad of topics. And that, for me, was a very simple example of how gender diversity, on how these women were communicating about business issues and the bottom line, but also the challenges of work-life balance. That conversation was 360 degrees different than all of the other sessions I was in. So today we ask that you share your ideas, talk to one another, talk about your own experiences, the challenges, and the opportunities. But before I introduce this morning's keynote, I want to share just a tidbit of what CalSTRS is doing to change the faces we see and the minds we trust in the financial industry. Just this month, after a long engagement process, CalSTRS, in collaboration with our investment partners, Legion Partners Asset Management, the Bank of California added 2 women to their previously all-male board. Ms. Curran, exactly. Ms. Curran, a retired executive vice president at Union Bank, and Dr. Hill, president of B. Hill Enterprise, in addition to their extensive industry knowledge, these highly qualified women bring a fresh perspective to what had been a board stuck in old school governance practices. CalSTRS was one of the first major U.S. pension funds to support the Association of Asian American Investment Managers, also known as AIM, as it launched at its launch, demonstrating our commitment to finding high-quality, highly qualified, diverse fund managers. Last year, CalSTRS was presented with AIM's Founder Award. This one-time only award honored CalSTRS' steadfast support over the last 10 years. I was, and I continue to be, proud that we support an association that is dedicated to the advancement of Asian and Pacific Islander leadership, especially when there are over 25,000 active CalSTRS members who identify as Asian American and Pacific Islander. In March of last year, CalSTRS demonstrated its ongoing commitment to moving the needle on gender diversity by spreading the, quote, beyond talk, taking action to achieve gender balance in the financial world, a networking workshop. It was held in San Francisco. Beyond Talk was inspired by CalSTRS' efforts to advance diversity in the investment industry, as well as the 72% female composition of the more than 900,000 person membership of the California State Teachers Retirement System. This year we held the workshop in Los Angeles, and our goal is to take this workshop to major cities nationwide. Since 2004, the CalSTRS investment branch has we've mentored students from many diverse backgrounds, making certain to include ethnic and gender diverse students. In 2016, we stretched ourselves even more. Our outreach efforts were to include students at colleges and universities at all levels of higher education, postgraduate, undergraduate, and community colleges. We had 164 applicants, 16 were interviewed, and 7 finalists were hired. There was 1 community college student, 1 international graduate student, and 5 undergraduate students having the opportunity to work alongside our investment staff. And as an added bonus, all 7 students completed the 500 hours of work experience required for them to take the state's investment officer exam when they graduate from college. This probably is the one point that I'm most proud of at CalSTRS. We walk the walk. What does that mean? According to the 2017 diversity report, almost half of our investment staff, I repeat, almost half of the CalSTRS investment staff identify as an ethnicity other than white, and more than half of our senior investment staff are women. That's a diverse record to be proud of. So Chris Elman, a white guy like myself, gets a lot of credit. Building diversity requires building a plan to make it happen. Just saying you want a diverse workforce or a board or a C-suite is not enough. The woman I'm about to introduce didn't sit at her desk watching the door, hoping diversity would walk in. She built not just a plan, but an entire organization to accelerate an inclusive culture in the investment profession. Helena Morrissey's background is impressive. Founder of the 30% Club, chair of the Diversity Project, graduate of Cambridge University, chair of the Investment Association, past CEO of Newton Investment Manager, and a published author, and the mother of 9 children. I have 2. Sometimes it feels like 9, but she has 9. So clearly she's the strongest person in the room. If you have any doubt, talk to somebody about it. Please join me in welcoming Helen Morrissey to today's Diversity Forum.
Thank you. Well, good morning, and thank you, Harry, for those kind remarks, although I'd rather have kept the 9 children bit till you got to know me better. But anyway, the cat's out the bag now. It really is a huge pleasure for me to be here. I'm very honored to be asked to give a few opening remarks to hopefully set some ideas going that we'll explore later during the day. Thank you, CalPERS and CalSTRS, for gathering us together to discuss the topic of diversity that I believe actually is both frustrating and fascinating in equal measure. Now, that might surprise you, given that I've been a passionate advocate for diversity for many years, but it is frustrating, as Harry's pointed out, that in the 21st century, in 2017, we are still talking about it, that we are still seeing a very slow pace of change. It's frustrating for those who perhaps aren't being quite so much at the forefront of campaigning, but who do get it, who are the CEOs of big companies and organizations who have sponsored many diversity initiatives, only to see, again, little to show for their efforts. It's also very frustrating if you are a diverse person and seeing a gap between, not obviously at CalPERS or CalSTRS or many of the organizations represented here, but seeing a gap between the walk and the talk. And finally, I would like to acknowledge, I think there's at least one other group that are frustrated, and that is the group of people who are quite skeptical still about the whole issue, who do still, if they were really honest, think that it's about political correctness rather than about good business. Now, they may not admit what they think, but I do think they often feel frustrated that we are spending so much time on something that they regard as peripheral to the main event. Now, the point of my talk is from here going to be very uplifting and positive about some of the things that I've seen work, but I do think we should acknowledge at the start of the day that so far we have probably had more work done around the issue and less success, less outcomes than we would all like to see. Now, on one level, it's quite simple. I came across this lovely cartoon the other day. Yep, that's come up. 10 white, rather bored-looking executives interviewing a black woman and putting the pressure on her to come up with what she can bring to the company. Now, I tweeted, this is from Private Eye News, a magazine, a parody magazine. I don't know how many of you have read it or subscribed to it. This was a tiny little cartoon in the back that I spotted and tweeted. And actually, it's been retweeted and liked about 800 times. The best response I got from somebody who commented on it, which rather shamed me actually, was the comment, "If I was her, I wouldn't hire any of them." And again, it kind of showed me, but again, it showed us that we all have prejudices, that we all have biases, and we're all looking at this assuming that she is the one who's being interviewed. Now, of course, we all laugh, and I think most of us, all of us hopefully in this room would say, well, that's, amusing, but actually we get it, and our recruitment policies, our recruitment practices would identify and encourage the diverse candidates. This is for the dinosaurs out there. And I suppose I want to start with a challenge to you, because I want you to consider an example. Now, this example comes courtesy of Andy Haldane, who is chief economist at the Bank of England, and he and I have worked on a number of aspects of diversity together, and he came up with this really, I think, quite illuminating example. You have two candidates for a job, as we so often do, and you give them both an aptitude test. Candidate A scores 8 out of 10, candidate B scores 4 out of 10. Now, let's leave aside the whole notion of identity diversity. Let's assume these two candidates are both, let's say, white women. And you haven't got anything to choose from in terms of adding diversity from one or the other. Now, I think most of our recruitment processes would automatically assume that candidate A should get the job. She scored twice as well on the test. It's obvious, isn't it? Let me throw something new into the equation, though. Supposing that you've also set this same aptitude test to the team that this successful candidate will join. And they score well on the test and mostly get around 8 right. They happen to be the same questions that candidate A also gets right. The only person between the existing team and your two candidates who can get those two questions right that elude the others is candidate B, even though she only scored half as well. The person who brings something new to your organization, who will enhance your decision-making, who will bring a new perspective, who brings something that will enhance your collective intelligence, is actually candidate B, subject to obviously checking out that it wasn't a fluke. But yet, most of us wouldn't think like that. Most of us, de facto, are hiring the same as people that we already have. And I think it's quite a powerful example of showing there's this gap that can develop. We can say we believe in diversity. We can try very hard to have inclusive behaviors and practices in our organizations. And yet still, we fall into the trap of not seeing things that are a bit outside the norm. Now, I would like to ask you, before I get onto some solutions, I would like to ask you for a show of hands about a couple of questions. Now, it's a bit difficult for me to see, but hopefully I can. Please say what you really feel in answer to these two questions. The first question is, do you believe that the financial performance, the performance of a company, is enhanced, is positively correlated with the diversity of that company? Let's say it's not just the board, but the management team as well, and the employees. So raise your hands if you believe that it's a positive correlation between the financial performance. Okay, a pretty satisfactory show of hands. I am in the right place. That's good. Okay, so now I want to ask, you're all in the business of either selecting fund managers or investing directly in companies or perhaps in the consultancy space. So you all get to choose between different groups of people. How many of you, raise your hands again, actually factor that, that variable into your analysis when you are selecting a fund manager, when you are choosing a company to invest in? Now, don't raise your hands if all you do is you have an RFP and you ask them, do they have a diversity and inclusion policy? How many of you actually have metrics that you look at when you're analyzing companies? Okay, I rest my case. Much smaller number of hands. Now, there's nothing to be embarrassed about that because it is the same response that I get whenever I ask the question. First time was actually at the CFA Society in Toronto about 18 months ago. And there we had voting buttons, so I can actually report what the numbers were. 93% of the audience, very similar mix, plan sponsors, fund managers, and pension fund consultants. 93% believed in the positive correlation between diversity. We actually were talking more about gender diversity specifically, but diversity in companies and financial returns. The other 7%, in case you're interested, actually weren't negative. They didn't think it was detrimental, but they were neutral. We immediately asked the follow-up question about how many actually factored it in, and 25% of the audience said that they did. It was an immediate follow-up question, as I say, it wasn't that we broke for lunch and came back. Very similar pattern to the one we just saw. Now, first of all, are we right to think that there is some positive correlation? Now, I know that many of you will be familiar with the McKinsey data, with Catalyst data on return on equity, return on capital employed. And I just wanted to share with you a summary of a few other ways of looking at it. We haven't got a lot of time to go into these, but on the left, top left, this is data from Credit Suisse, First Boston, 3,000 companies globally, large cap companies. The gray line are the companies with one or more women on their board. The blue line have no women on their board, a 10-year time frame. On the right-hand side, these are companies grouped according to how many women employees they have. Top third, middle third, and bottom third. And again, we've got relative returns and then risk-adjusted returns. The bottom, higher returns for lower risk. For example, cash flow returns on investment. A small cohort of companies in the 50% club at the top there, compared with this time the MSC ACWI index. Whatever way we look at it, a positive correlation. Now, I am a philosophy major, as you'd say here. I'm not going to try to make the case that this is causal, but I think it provides a useful clue. It may be, for example, that the women are very smart and join the best companies, or that those companies that have more women on their boards are also very forward-looking in other respects. But it's a useful clue. So where are we going wrong? Few explanations for our gap between what we believe in terms of positive correlation and what we're actually doing. So we either don't really believe that diversity has value. I hope that's not the case. Either we're a bit irrational, we believe in theory, but we don't apply in practice. Or we're still learning. We're either thinking about what to do with it still, or how we might measure the analysis, we might not have the data, or we're just not quite sure about where to start. So the hope really lies in three. And I want to share with you one example of a new approach to accelerating change that gave me some hope that we can come up with ideas to further all aspects of our work on diversity, and then to tie back with the investment community. Now, in 2010, I set up something called the 30% Club. It's already been alluded to. What this aimed to do was to improve the proportion of women on UK company boards. In 2010, that number on the FTSE was at 12.5%. And by the time we finished, about 5 years later, didn't quite get to 30%, I'm afraid, but just shy of 27%. And you'll see the shape of the curve is very nice. What we saw over that time was also a lack of, or huge progress in the next level down of companies. The 250 started at only 8% women on boards and ended at 23%. And we saw a massive drop in the numbers of all male boards. 30% Club was born out of frustration. I used that word at the start. I was frustrated that I wasn't getting anywhere with my own diversity initiatives in my own company. And I was invited to speak by Goldman Sachs as part of their Diversity Week in late 2009. And as we had a lunch afterwards, and as I listened, I realized that everybody was stuck. I came away from that lunch. They had lots of efforts, very little to show for it, lots of initiatives, and no progress. I thought, these are smart people. We're trying very hard. We must be doing something wrong. And some of the things that I came up with were more by luck than judgment, I must admit. But one of the things was, if we were going to try and change the boards to start with, partly because that was measurable and symbolic, we had to get those in power, those who had the power to change the boards behind it. And so instead of women leading a campaign, the leaders of this campaign were the chairmen. Often, obviously, mostly they are men. I asked two, Sir Wynne Bischoff, then chair of Lloyds Banking Group and now chair of the Financial Reporting Council that looks after the Corporate Governance Code in the UK, and Sir Roger Carr, then chair of Centrica, now chair of BAE Systems, what they thought of an idea to have a campaign led by them to improve the numbers of women on their boards. And both of them said in their own words, yes, we have seen the positive difference that having more women on our boards makes, but we can't get enough of them. And so they began a journey with me, which achieved those improved numbers. Their leadership was important, but not the only issue. With their help, we recalibrated the problem. It went from being a women's issue to a business issue, from a special interest issue to everybody's issue. What I discovered, and this was the luck, not judgment, point, that actually there's a huge competition between FTSE chairmen. I mean, who would have thought it? Huh? So they all got quite competitive with each other about who could get there faster. It was marvelous. They did all the work for me, really. We also had a huge amount of media attention. It was regarded as doing a social good, and the media are not always hugely supportive, of course, but this was something that they got firmly behind. We also had a target. I'm firmly against quotas, which I think are about coercion. This was about people wanting what we wanted and wanting to do something about it. If they ended up thinking it was their own idea, that was even better. But we had a deadline. We said, enough's enough, we've got to resolve this. And finally, but by no means least, it was very collaborative. It was actually a feminine kind of approach. We worked with others who were already doing great work in this space, including Lord Davis, who had led a government review and also recommended voluntary action. And it turned out to be an early example of he for she. And one of the things that we did was have the investment community get behind this to some extent. I just joined LGIM, Legal and General Investment Management, and they have worked hard to escalate the issue so that it's not just talking about it, but actually using voting. A problem, of course, is that the fund management industry is not exactly perfect itself. And one of the things that was alluded to in the introduction is that in my last year as chair of the Investment Association, I've set up something to try to address the lack of diversity, not just women, but probably of all sorts, although we don't usually have the data. This is a pictorial representative of Citywire's global database of fund managers, 15,000 managers, 1,500 or so women. And that picture is very similar if you look at individual countries. And we don't have the data, as I say, on ethnicity, on sexuality, on socioeconomic backgrounds, But I think we'd probably be surprised to find that any of that was better than the women data. And in fact, one of the first things that we're doing with the diversity project, which is trying to create overall an inclusive culture in the investment profession, is to measure where we stand today. So Mercer's is currently conducting a survey across the UK asset management industry and asking people both about their backgrounds, but also about their attitudes, and trying to put our finger on where we stand today so we can do something about it. It's already been mentioned that diversity is not something for its own sake. Of course, we all believe firmly, I'm sure, in equality. But actually, we know we're not going to win that argument with business leaders who are interested in also profits as well as purpose, hopefully. The point that has been raised earlier is, of course, we're trying to get multiple perspectives to bear on today's issues. And I suppose where I wanted to conclude with is the thought that we know we're in a period of great upheaval. We know we have probably an escalation of issues. Actually, this time last year, of course, Brexit was all the talk. Now we've been way exceeded by all of the political issues here in the US, so I feel a bit safer this year. But we know that we can't, to use Albert Einstein's expression, we can't solve the problems that we have today with the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. We need to deliver great returns for our clients, whether we're a fund manager, whether we're a plan sponsor, whatever part of the business that we're in. And that means we need to have the best talent, the most diverse perspectives, lateral thinking, creative thinking, new ideas. I am confident that we can close some of those gaps, that we can alleviate some of the frustrations, but by acknowledging actually that the efforts to date, the proliferation of diversity initiatives actually hasn't delivered often. Thinking about it a little bit differently, recognizing that we need those in power, the white, heterosexual, middle-aged, middle-class men to lead the charge for diverse talent has been something that I discovered to be much more powerful than I would have dared imagine. Thank you for listening. I hope I've set the stage for a very interesting day. Thank you.